The first time I found something wrong in my own ledger, I told myself I'd miscounted. That's the kind of lie a man tells himself when he's spent 40 years trusting his own arithmetic. I've been keeping books by hand since before anybody in Larkspur Hollow owned a computer, and I know the difference between a mistake and something that's been moved on purpose. What I found that Tuesday in March wasn't a mistake. It was a number that had been changed twice, once carelessly and once carefully. Like somebody had gone back to cover the first correction. My name's Walter Combs, I'm 68 years old, and I own Combs Hardware, a single storefront on Route 9 with a 2-bedroom apartment above it, the kind of place where the bell over the door has rung the same note since Eisenhower was president. My wife Dolores ran the register for 31 years before the stroke took her 4 winters back. I still keep her stool behind the counter. Nobody sits in it, nobody's asked to. I taught shop class at the high school for 3 decades before I retired into the store full-time, and if there's one thing 28 years of teenagers with table saws taught me, it's that trouble rarely announces itself. It shows up polite, it shows up helpful, it shows up asking to hold the wood steady while you make the cut, and by the time you notice your hand's not on the fence anymore, the blade's already moving. My son Marcus works the floor with me most days. He's 34, and there was a stretch about 6 years ago when he nearly cost us the building, a gambling habit that started with a fantasy football pool and ended with him borrowing against inventory I didn't know he had the authority to borrow against. We didn't talk for the better part of a year after I found out. We talk now, carefully, the way you talk to somebody after you've both said things you can't fully take back, where every conversation still has a little bit of that old ice underneath it. No matter how warm the top layer gets. So when Marcus came into the store that Tuesday afternoon with a man I'd never met and said, "Dad, I want you to meet somebody who might be able to help us," I felt that old ice shift under my feet before the man had even said hello. His name was Derek Vale, mid-40s, good haircut, the kind of soft-spoken confidence that made you lean in to hear him instead of the other way around. He shook my hand like he meant it, which I'll admit surprised me. And he didn't look around the store sizing it up the way some men do. He looked at the shelves like he was actually reading what was on them. "Mr. Combs," he said, "Marcus has told me a lot about this place. 30-some years is nothing to sneeze at in this economy." 34, I said. "Feels longer some days." He smiled like that was a good joke, even though I hadn't meant it as one. Marcus explained it while Derek stood there letting him. Derek did small business turnaround work. Mostly in towns like ours, mostly with family operations that had good bones but old habits. He'd help us modernize the inventory system, maybe bring in some contractor accounts we'd been too small to land on our own, take some of the paperwork off my plate so I could, as Marcus put it, actually enjoy owning the place again. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that I already enjoyed owning the place, paperwork included. 40 years teaches you when to hold your tongue with your own son. "We wouldn't be selling anything," Marcus said, like he'd read my face anyway. "Derek would come on as an operating partner. Help with decisions, that's all." I looked at Derek. He looked back at me steady, no flinch, no glance away, which either meant he had nothing to hide or he'd had a great deal of practice looking like he didn't. "I appreciate you thinking of the store," I told him, and I did mean that part. "Let me look over whatever paperwork you've got. I like to read things twice before I sign my name near them." "Of course," Derek said. "No rush at all, Mr. Combs. This only works if everybody's comfortable." He left an hour later with a handshake and a business card that had 4 different phone numbers on it and no street address for an office. Marcus stayed behind to close up, humming while he restocked the fastener bins, looser and lighter than I'd seen him in longer than I wanted to admit. I told myself that was worth something. I told myself a man can change, that I owed him the benefit of 6 clean years. That Dolores would have boxed my ears for the suspicion I was already carrying up the stairs to bed with me that night. I found the folder on the office desk 2 days later, the one Marcus said he'd leave for me to read at my own pace. It was thicker than I expected for something described as just a partnership. 20-some pages, dense with clauses about operating authority and decision rights and something called a springing provision I had to read 3 times before I understood what it meant. And even then I wasn't sure I had it right. I sat down at Dolores's old workbench in the back, the one we never moved because it still had her handwriting in pencil on the underside where she used to mark cutting measurements, and I read that folder from the first page to the last with my reading glasses low on my nose and my coffee going cold beside me. By the time I finished, my coffee wasn't the only thing that had gone cold. Marcus hadn't just brought a partner into the store. Somewhere in that language, buried under 6 pages of financial terms, Marcus had signed away something he plainly didn't understand he was signing away, and I intended to find out exactly what it was before I said another word to either one of them. I didn't confront Marcus that night. I've made that mistake before, coming at him hot with an accusation before I had the facts straight, and all it ever bought me was a slammed door and 3 days of silence. So I did what I should have done the first time, 6 years back. I sat with what I knew and I kept my mouth shut until I knew more. What I knew was this: the folder called Derek an operating partner, but 3 separate clauses gave him authority over financial decisions that didn't require my signature or Marcus's, only his. One clause used the phrase, "in the event of incapacity or diminished capacity of a controlling party," and I'd read that line so many times the words had stopped making sense, the way any word does if you stare at it long enough. I called Ruth Ann Pruitt first thing the next morning, before we opened. Ruth Ann's worked my register for going on 19 years, ever since her husband passed, and she needed something steady to get her out of the house. She also works 2 afternoons a week at the county clerk's office, filing deeds and business registrations, and there isn't a piece of paper that crosses that counter she doesn't remember by Friday. "Walter," she said, when I laid it out for her over coffee in the back room, "you want me to look and see if this Vale fella's filed anything. I want to know what he's registered, where, and when," I said. Quietly, she looked at me over the rim of her mug for a second longer than she needed to. Ruth Ann's known me long enough to hear what I don't say as clearly as what I do. "This about Marcus? It's about the store." "Same thing," she said, and went back to work. I didn't hear from her for 4 days. In the meantime, I watched my son the way I used to watch a green employee on his first week with a table saw. Close enough to catch a mistake, careful not to let him see me hovering. Derek came by twice more that week, both times in the afternoon when I was usually in the back doing inventory, both times leaving before I came up front. I noticed that. Marcus noticed I noticed. We didn't talk about it. What I did notice, plain as anything, was that Marcus had started answering his phone in the stockroom instead of the floor. Small thing, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't already looking for reasons to worry. He'd always been an open book, my son, terrible at cards for exactly that reason, and now he had a hand he was holding close to his chest, and I didn't know if it was shame or strategy, and either one scared me for different reasons. I called Sam Whitlock on Thursday. Sam and I go back to the days when he was still practicing estate law out of a one-room office above the feed store, before he retired and started spending his afternoons restoring an old farmall tractor he'll never actually get running. We fish together twice a month, more out of habit than any real love of fishing, and we've buried a wife each, his 4 years before mine, so there's a shorthand between us that doesn't need much explaining. I brought the folder to his place that evening. His office is really just a converted sun porch, stacked with law books he hasn't opened in a decade and tractor manuals he reads like scripture, and he cleared a space on the desk and put on his readers and went through those 20 pages slower than I had, marking things with a pencil as he went. "This here," he said, tapping the page with the incapacity clause, "this is the kind of language that shows up in a supported decision-making agreement, done right. Done wrong, it's the opening move in something a lot uglier." "Uglier how?" Sam sat back and took his glasses off, which is a thing he does when he's about to tell you something he'd rather not. "Walter, you know what a guardianship petition is? Court takes over somebody's decisions. Old folks, mostly, people who can't manage their own affairs anymore. That's the plain version. Here's the ugly version. Somebody files a petition saying you're not competent to run your own affairs, gets a doctor or an evaluator willing to say the same, and if a judge signs off, whoever's named guardian gets control. Bank accounts, property, business decisions, all of it, and here's the part that keeps me up some nights. The person it happens to is usually the last one to see it coming. Because by the time the petition's filed, it's already halfway decided." The room got quiet enough that I could hear Sam's old clock ticking on the wall behind him. "You think that's what this is?" I said. It wasn't really a question. I think a man doesn't write himself unilateral authority over incapacity of a controlling party into a hardware store partnership unless he's thought about it a lot more than a business consultant needs to, Sam said. "I'm not saying it's happening. I'm saying it's the shape of a thing I've seen before. And I don't like how well this fits it." I drove home slower than usual that night, past the shop with its dark windows and the little apartment lit up above it where Marcus has lived since his divorce, and I sat in my truck in the lot for a good 10 minutes before I went up. Ruth Ann called me at the store 2 mornings later, and I could hear something different in her voice before she even got the words out, a kind of quiet that wasn't her usual quiet. "Walter, I need you to come by after we close today." Not on the phone. "Ruth Ann, After we close, she said, and hung up, which she has never once done to me in 19 years. She was waiting at the back counter when I came down after locking the front, a manila folder of her own sitting closed in front of her, and she didn't open it right away. She just looked at me the way you look at somebody before you tell them something you wish you didn't have to. I ran his name through the state business registry, like you asked, she said. Found the 4 LLCs, same as his card. Nothing unusual there on the surface. But I got curious, and I ran him through the court records database too, out of habit more than anything. She slid the folder toward me. Walter, there's a case out of Ashe County. Filed about 2 years back. Different names, different business, but I want you to read the petition language, because I read it 3 times myself before I called you, and I want to know if you see what I'm seeing. I opened the folder, and there it was, black and white, a business partner's name I didn't recognize, an elderly shop owner I'd never met, and a phrase about diminished capacity that I'd just spent an evening staring at in my own kitchen, word for word close enough that it stopped my breath in my chest. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark going over that language again in my head, diminished capacity of a controlling party, and thinking about a stranger in Ashe County who'd probably lain awake the same way. Not knowing yet what was coming for him, by morning I'd made a decision I wasn't proud of making, which was to stop trusting my own judgment on this and go get somebody else's. Sam gave me Elena Cho's name over the phone before I'd even finished explaining why I was calling. She used to work elder law cases for the state, now she's private, he said. She'll see straight through this faster than I can, and she'll know what to actually do about it, which is more than I can offer you from a tractor shed. Elena Cho's office was above the pharmacy in town, small, tidy, nothing on the walls but her license and a framed photo of what I took to be her grandmother. She was maybe 40, quick eyes, the kind of person who lets you finish a sentence before she starts building her answer instead of building it while you're still talking. I laid the partnership folder in front of her along with Ruth Ann's copy of the Ashe County petition, and I watched her read both, slower the second time through. The way you read something once for the shape of it and again for the trap. Mr. Combs, she said finally, I want to be straight with you. I can't tell you for certain this is what it looks like. But I've read petitions like this one before, and I've read partnership language like yours before, and I don't like how neatly they fit together. So what do I do? 2 things, and we do them now, not later. She held up a finger. First, you get an independent cognitive evaluation, done by a doctor of your choosing. On your terms, on the record, before anybody else gets the chance to arrange one on theirs. If somebody ever tries to use a rigged evaluation against you, I want a clean one already sitting in the file with an earlier date on it. She held up a second finger. Second, we draft what's called a supported decision-making agreement, naming people you trust to help you make decisions if you ever need it, on your terms, in writing, so no court ever has to guess what you'd have wanted. Between those 2 things, most of what a bad faith guardianship petition needs to work, we take away from him before he can use it. I sat with that for a minute. There's a particular kind of insult in being told, even gently, even by somebody on your side, that you need to go prove to a stranger you can still think for yourself. 40-some years I stood in front of teenagers with power tools and never lost one of them to their own carelessness. I built this shop with Dolores from a leaking roof and a dirt floor. I didn't care for the idea of a man in a white coat asking me what year it was. I don't like this, I told her. I know, she said. Most people don't. The ones who wait until they need it are usually the ones who end up not getting the choice. She was right, and I hated that she was right, and I told her to set it up. The evaluation was 2 weeks out, a Thursday morning in a clinic 40 minutes down the mountain, and I didn't tell Marcus where I was going. I told him I had a hardware distributor meeting in Boone, which wasn't entirely a lie, since I stopped at the distributor on the way back to make it true. The doctor was younger than I expected, patient, thorough, and none of it felt the way I'd braced for. Memory tasks, some questions about dates and current events, a few about managing money and medication, nothing that felt like a trap, though I noticed myself sitting up straighter anyway, answering slower and more carefully than I needed to, the way you drive extra careful past a police car even when you haven't done anything wrong. When it was over, she told me what I expected to hear and what I was, if I'm honest, relieved to hear anyway. Sharp, oriented, no concerns. She said she'd have the written report to Elena within the week. I drove home with the radio off, thinking about how strange it was to feel grateful for a piece of paper confirming what I already knew about my own mind, and how much worse it would have felt to need it and not have it. Elena had the decision-making agreement ready within a few days after that. 4 pages naming myself as the only party with final authority over the store's major decisions, with Sam and Elena listed as people I could formally consult, nobody else, nothing automatic, nothing that triggered from anybody else's say-so. I signed it in her office with Ruth Ann as a witness, since Ruth Ann already knew enough of the shape of things that I didn't have to explain myself, and I asked Elena to keep the original in her safe rather than mine. Whatever happens now, she told me. Sliding the folder shut, nobody blindsides you on paper. That door's closed. I wanted to believe that was the hard part done. I told myself it was, for about 4 days. It was a Tuesday evening, later than I usually stayed, and I'd come back down to the store for a part I'd forgotten to order, using my key at the side entrance instead of coming through the front so I wouldn't have to turn all the lights back on. I heard Marcus's voice before I saw him, up near the register, low and tight in a way I didn't recognize from my son. And Derek's voice under it, calm the way a man is calm when he already knows he's won an argument. Not what we agreed to, Derek. I never signed off on pulling from the equipment line to cover that. You did, Marcus. It's in the same document you signed in March. I'm not asking you to remember every clause, that's what I'm here for. That's the whole point of a partner. I don't remember agreeing to any loan against the equipment. You don't need to remember it, Derek said, easy, unbothered, the way you'd correct a child without raising your voice. It's handled. I need you to trust me on this one. I stood in the dark of my own storeroom, 3 feet from a wall of PVC fittings I could have named blind, and I did not go out there. Not yet. I stood very still and listened to my son go quiet in a way that told me he didn't believe what he'd just been told, and didn't know yet what to do about not believing it. I didn't sleep on that one either. I stood in that storeroom until I heard Derek's truck pull out of the lot. And I heard my son lock the register drawer slower than usual, the way a man moves when his hands aren't fully cooperating with him. I could have gone out there right then. I didn't. 40 years of teaching kids not to reach for a running blade taught me that the worst time to grab something is the second it starts moving. I went home and I waited, and waiting has never once come easy to me, whatever anybody thinks. It was 3 days before Marcus came to me, and when he did, I understood why it took him that long. Because what he laid out on my workbench that night cost him something to carry up those stairs. He came up after closing, let himself into the apartment without knocking the way he'd done since he was a boy, and he had a shoebox under one arm that I recognized before he said a word, because I'd seen a box just like it once before, 6 years back, in the worst conversation I've ever had with my son. He set it on Dolores's workbench next to my reading glasses and my evening coffee, and he didn't sit down. Dad, I need you to hear me out before you say anything. All right. He opened the box. Betting slips, some of them old enough to have gone soft at the folds. A stack of them from a stretch of months I thought we'd put behind us for good. My stomach dropped the way it does when a step isn't where you expect it. These aren't new, he said quickly, reading my face the way he always could. These are old, from before. I never got rid of them. I don't know why, maybe so I'd remember. That's not why I'm showing you. He set his phone down on top of the box, screen lit, a string of text messages already pulled up. This is why. I picked up the phone. Read it twice, the way Elena had read that partnership folder, once for the shape and once for the trap. Derek, I found something interesting going through old county court records. Small claims, a debt collector, your name on it from a few years back. Whole town would find that pretty interesting too, wouldn't they, after you've been telling everybody you turned things around. Marcus, that's not relevant to any of this. Derek, it's relevant if you stop being useful. I need the transfer paperwork signed by Friday. Just initial where I marked it. Your father doesn't need to be bothered with the details, that's the whole point of me being here. I set the phone down slow. Marcus, what transfer paperwork? He sat down then, finally, on Dolores's old stool, the one nobody sits in, and I let that go because some rules matter less than others on some nights. There's a document, he said. Derek's had me signing things for months, Dad, updates to the partnership, expense authorizations, stuff he says is routine. I didn't read half of it close enough. I trusted him. I know how that sounds now. His jaw worked for a second. 2 weeks ago he had me sign something he called a transition acknowledgement. I asked what it was for and he said it was paperwork in case anything ever happened to you, so the business wouldn't get tied up in probate. He made it sound responsible, like something a good son does. Did you keep a copy? No, that's the thing. I never got a copy of that one. I've been trying to remember exactly what I signed for 4 days and I can't, not word for word, and that's what's been eating at me, because I don't sign things I don't remember anymore. Not since last time, and now he's using this. He tapped the phone, like I owe him for keeping quiet about a debt that's already public record if anybody bothered to look. I sat with that a moment. And I want to say I felt only anger at Derek, and mostly I did. But there was another thing sitting right alongside it, quieter and harder to look at straight on. My son had come to me the second he understood what he'd stepped in, instead of trying to fix it himself and hide it from me the way I half expected, the way I might have guessed 6 years ago he'd do. He hadn't done that. He'd carried a shoebox up a flight of stairs instead. Marcus, look at me. He did, and it cost him, I could see that. You should have told me the first time something about that partnership didn't sit right with you. But you're telling me now, and now is what we've got to work with. I signed something, Dad. I don't know what it says. If it's what I think it might be, then we find out exactly what it says, I said, and we find out together. I called Elena the next morning before the store opened, and when I laid it out for her, phone messages and all, she was quiet on the line longer than I liked. Mr. Combs, I need you to send me copies of everything Marcus has, tonight if you can. The texts especially. That's not just suspicious business practice, that's coercion, and coercion has a way of unraveling a case faster than paperwork does on its own. She paused. Does Marcus remember anything at all about the document he signed? A date, a heading, anything? He said transition acknowledgement. Another pause, longer this time. Walter, that phrasing, in this context, tells me exactly what I was afraid it would tell me. That's very likely language tied to establishing an incapacity trigger, the same kind we saw in the Ashe County petition Ruth Ann found. If Marcus signed something like that without a clear copy, Derek may be building a document he can point to later and claim family consent was already on record. We need that copy, and we need to know it exists before he decides to use it. I looked at Marcus across the workbench when I hung up, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen since he was a boy failing to hide a bad report card. Except this time he wasn't hiding anything from me. He was waiting to see what I'd do with what he'd handed me. He's going to come back around on that Friday deadline, I said. What happens if you don't sign whatever he's got waiting? He said he'd let it slip around town. About the debt, about all of it, let him, I said, and I meant it, though it cost me something to say it that plain, because I knew what that kind of talk could do to a man standing in a town this size, knew it better than most. Having lived here my whole life, your name being attached to an old debt is not the same thing as your name being attached to fraud, and one of those things people forget by spring and the other one follows a man permanently. I'd rather you stood here red-faced for a season than let him walk you any further into what he's actually building. Marcus didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, what do we do Friday? I thought about that a long moment, about Alina's voice on the phone. About a shoebox of old paper sitting between us like something we'd finally set down instead of carried, and about the fact that for the first time since this whole business started, I wasn't the only one holding a piece of it. Friday, I said, you sign whatever he hands you exactly the way he expects you to. And you let him keep believing this is still going his way. Friday came and went quieter than I expected. Marcus signed what Derek put in front of him, some routine-looking authorization Derek slid across the counter with barely a second glance. And Derek left that afternoon looking pleased with himself in a way that told me he still believed he had the upper hand. I hated watching my son do it. I hated it almost as much as I was grateful he could. I sent copies of everything to Elena that same night, the texts, the old betting slips scanned for context, Marcus's account of what he remembered and didn't remember signing. She called me back within the hour, which for a woman with her caseload told me plenty about how seriously she was taking it. This helps, she said. This helps a great deal. But Walter, I need you to understand something. Coercion is powerful once we're in front of a judge who can weigh it properly. It does nothing to stop whatever Derek files before we get there. If he's building toward a petition, evidence of pressure on Marcus doesn't block the filing. It only helps us dismantle it after the fact. So we wait for him to file, and then we fight it. That's about the shape of it, she said. Which means the next weeks matter more than the ones behind us. I didn't sleep well through most of October. I want to say I did, that a man my age has learned patience, but the truth is I lay awake more nights than not, running through every version of what Derek might be building, wondering if I'd fortified myself in the right places or just in the places that felt good to fortify. It was the second week of November when Ruth Ann came to me with the thing that turned my stomach in a new direction entirely. There's a name on a new filing, she said. Quiet, in the back room after close. An evaluator, Dr. Foster Lang, out of Boone. He's listed as an independent medical consultant on a guardianship petition filed in Watauga County 8 months ago. Same firm structure as the two cases I already found. I don't think independent means what it's supposed to mean here. I looked him up myself that night, this Dr. Lang, and found what you'd expect to find if you knew what you were looking for and didn't find it if you didn't. A modest practice, a handful of favorable reviews that read a little too similar to each other. No red flags a casual search would catch, which was, Elena told me later, exactly the point. A man like Derek didn't need an evaluator who was obviously crooked. He needed one who was quietly available. 3 days after that, it stopped being a name on somebody else's filing. Marcus came upstairs pale on a Tuesday evening and told me Derek had asked him, casual as anything, whether I'd been, seeming a little more forgetful lately. Whether I'd repeated myself in conversation, whether I'd left the stove on or misplaced my keys. Small ordinary questions dressed up to sound like concern. Marcus had said no, truthfully, and Derek had nodded like that was fine, like he was just checking in, and left it there. I understood then that Derek wasn't asking those questions to learn the answer. He was asking them to have them on record, coming from Marcus, in case anybody asked later what the family had noticed. Elena confirmed the fear a week after that. Dr. Lang had submitted a written evaluation, and a guardianship petition had been formally filed in our county courthouse, listing concerns about diminished capacity, citing, among other things, a documented history of confusion reported by close family, and requesting emergency temporary authority over the business and its assets pending a full hearing. I read that filing standing in Elena's office with my coat still on, and for the first time since this whole business started, my hands weren't steady. He's asking for temporary authority now, I said. Before any hearing. He's asking, Elena said, and a judge doesn't have to grant it. But Walter, I won't lie to you. Sometimes they do, especially if the paperwork looks clean on its face and nobody's there yet to argue against it. We have days, not weeks, to get in front of this. We had my evaluation, dated and clean, sitting in her files 2 months ahead of Lang's. We had the decision-making agreement. We had Ruth Ann's documentation on the Ashe County and Watauga County cases. And Marcus's phone, and the shoebox. What we didn't have, not yet, was anyone outside our own small circle who could confirm any of it carried weight beyond our word against Derek's paperwork, and a temporary hearing was set for 8 days out, faster than I'd let myself believe he could move. I spent those 8 days doing the only thing that ever steadied me, which was working with my hands, restocking shelves that didn't need restocking, sanding down a display case that was already smooth. Anything to keep from sitting still with what might happen if a judge looked at Lang's report before looking at mine. Some nights I sat at Dolores's workbench with both evaluations spread out side by side under the lamp, mine and the one Elena had gotten a copy of through the filing. Reading them over and over like rereading them enough times would change which one a judge trusted first. It was a Thursday morning, 4 days before the hearing, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A county exchange I'd come to know only from Ruth Ann's calls. Mr. Combs, this is Detective Renata Ruiz, Financial Crimes Division. I understand you may have some information relevant to an investigation I've been running for the better part of a year. I'd like to come by the store this afternoon, if you have the time. I sat down slow on Dolores's stool, the one nobody sits in, and for the first time in a long while I let myself believe we might not be facing this alone. Detective Ruiz arrived at 2:30 that afternoon, a slim folder under one arm and the kind of calm, unhurried manner that told me she'd done this exact walk into exact rooms like mine more times than she could count. She sat across the workbench from me and Marcus, who I'd asked to be there, because whatever this was, I wasn't doing it without my son standing next to me anymore. I've been building a case against Derek Vale for the better part of 11 months, she said. 2 prior counties, 2 elderly business owners, nearly identical patterns. Manufactured concerns about competency, a cooperating evaluator willing to write what he's told to write. Both times he moved to acquire the property once guardianship was granted, and both times he moved fast, before anyone thought to look closely. What I didn't have, until Ruth Ann Pruitt's name turned up cross-referencing a filing search, was a live case I could still stop before the petition succeeded. You've had this whole thing on your desk, I said, and you're telling me now. I'm telling you now because now is when it does you the most good, she said, not unkindly. I needed enough on Vale to move on him cleanly, and you and your family, without knowing it, have spent the last several months building exactly that. The texts to your son, your independent evaluation, dated well ahead of his. Ms. Pruitt's records on Ashe and Watauga counties. That's not just a defense against a guardianship petition, Mr. Combs. Combined with what I have, that's the spine of a criminal case. Marcus sat very still through all of it, and when Ruiz turned to him and asked if he'd be willing to testify to what Derek had said to him, about the debt, about the paperwork, he said yes before she'd finished the sentence. The temporary hearing was set for the following Monday, 10 in the morning, second floor of the county courthouse, the kind of plain municipal room with fluorescent lighting that makes everybody look a little more guilty and a little more innocent than they are. Elena had me there 20 minutes early. Marcus sat beside me, in a collared shirt he'd ironed himself, which is a thing I noticed and didn't say anything about, because some gestures don't need commentary. Derek came in at 10:05 with Dr. Lang beside him, the two of them wearing the relaxed confidence of men expecting a formality, not a fight. Derek's eyes found me first, then Elena, then Marcus, and I watched something flicker behind his charm when he saw his supposed accomplice sitting calm and upright next to his father instead of nervous and isolated the way Derek needed him to be. Then he saw Detective Ruiz seated in the gallery, and the flicker became something closer to a crack. The judge called the matter, and Elena stood first. She laid it out plainly, without theater, the way Sam had told me good lawyers do it, not shouting, just building one fact on top of another until the shape of the thing was undeniable. My independent evaluation, dated 2 months before Dr. Lang's, showing no concerns whatsoever. The supported decision-making agreement, executed and witnessed, naming exactly who I trusted and precisely how much authority they had, which was none beyond consultation. The text messages Marcus had preserved, in which Derek threatened to expose an old debt unless Marcus kept signing documents he didn't understand. And then, the part that made Derek go very still, Ruth Ann's records from Ashe and Watauga counties, matched line for line against Dr. Lang's report language, and Detective Ruiz's sworn statement that both prior guardianship petitions had used the same evaluator. The same phrasing, and the same intended outcome, a fast transfer of decision-making authority followed by a rapid sale of the underlying property. Your Honor, Elena said, this is not a family expressing honest concern for an aging relative. This is the third documented instance of the same manufactured scheme. The judge asked Derek's attorney if he wished to respond. He conferred with Derek for a long moment, low voices, and then said only that his client reserved further comment pending review. Which is a lawyer's way of saying there wasn't much left to say. The judge denied the petition outright and asked, given what had just been presented, whether the district attorney's office wished to be looped in immediately rather than waiting on a referral. Detective Ruiz was already standing. It happened quietly, in the hallway outside the courtroom rather than in front of the gallery, which I understood later was deliberate on Ruiz's part, sparing my family a scene none of us needed. She read Derek his rights beside a water fountain and a bulletin board of jury duty notices, and he didn't fight it, didn't run, just stood there with the particular stillness of a man watching a version of himself he'd always outrun finally catch up to him. Dr. Lang was taken in separately not an hour later, once Ruiz's office moved on the connected complaint. Derek Vale was charged with attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult, conspiracy to commit fraud, and 2 additional counts tied directly to the Ashe and Watauga County cases once those files were formally reopened. Dr. Lang lost his license pending the outcome and was charged as well, for his part in writing what he was paid to write rather than what he'd found. I didn't go back to the store that first evening. Marcus and I sat on the courthouse steps for a while instead, not saying much, watching the town go by the way it always does, slow and unbothered, like it hadn't just watched something enormous happen 2 floors up. I should have come to you the first week he showed me that partnership paperwork. Marcus said finally. You came to me when it mattered, I said. That's the part I'm going to remember. The following month, Elena drew up new papers, real ones this time, making Marcus a full and legally protected partner in Combs Hardware. His authority spelled out plainly, nothing hidden in a clause neither of us had bothered to read twice. We signed them together at Dolores's old workbench, the 2 of us, no outside consultant standing over either shoulder. The store opened as usual the next morning. Same bell over the door, same smell of sawdust and old wood polish that's been there longer than either of us has been alive. Marcus stood behind the counter beside me, sorting fasteners into the same bins he'd restocked the night Derek first walked through our door, and for the first time in longer than I could measure, I wasn't watching him to catch a mistake. I was just working alongside my son, the way I'd always meant to, before I let fear teach me to do otherwise.